At the turn of the century, something was changing in London. As the police force had been running for a few decades by this point, the need to keep up with the times was upon them, much to their chagrin. As women's roles in society began to slowly but surely change, in ever slightly improving increments, institutions that had always been a boys' club had to change. With World War I looming and men being drafted into military service, women were left behind to hold down the home front, and as such, earned trust in their usually male-dominated positions. As time passed and the men that survived the war returned, they were surprised to see that things had changed, and they weren't sure if they liked it. Today on Macabre London, we uncover what it was really like to be one of the first ever female police officers, as we delve into the women who made the Met. Welcome back to the next episode of my Crime and Punishment in London series. I'm Nikki Druce, your host with a silent G, and in the last episode we wrapped up the series within a series on the police investigations into the Jack the Ripper murders and how the so-called first serial killer of London, spoiler alert, he wasn't, got away with his crimes. But alongside the social injustices the victims in the East End faced, it highlighted the need for women to be a part of the police force. But that would still be a way off just yet. But the tides were slowly turning, and today we'll find out just how tricky it was to be one of the first women in the force. Now, if you're new here and this is your first time listening to or watching Macabre London, then make sure you pick up with the first few episodes in this Crime and Punishment series so you're up to speed, even though I do make it so you can pick up with any episode as a standalone piece. But you'll get way more out of it if you know the timeline up to this point. But if you've been here for the duration, welcome back and let's dive straight back in. If you want to get more of the show, I'd love for you to join me and the rest of the Ghoul Gang on patreon.com/Macabre London to be part of the exclusive club. It really is the best way to support the show to keep it going in return for extra bonus content such as my spooky bedtime stories, and I've started a new segment, a show after the show called Pod Mortem, where I discuss my own thoughts and theories and all the behind the scenes investigating that ends up on the cutting room floor, but is still juicy enough to add a bit more to the case. Head on over and I'll see you there. But now it's time to dust off your comfiest walking boots because we're about to go back out on the beat and pick up with the next part of Crime and Punishment in the capital city. When the Metropolitan Police Force was officially established in 1829 by Robert Peel, there was never a consideration for it to ever include women. The men who were taken on in those first days, as we discovered in our previous episodes, were not always the most savoury of characters, and were often bolshy individuals far more interested in perverting the course of justice for their own gains than helping anybody. As time passed and the work of the police began to be slowly accepted by the public as something that was actually of occasional benefit, the more varied the work became. The original modus operandi of catching criminals became entwined with the day-to-day lives of the criminals themselves. Often criminality ran in the family, and if these were bad people on the streets, you can only imagine what they were like at home. As the Industrial Revolution came and went, and family dynamics started to change with an increased amount of women entering the workforce, attitudes began to change towards them. But there was still a long road ahead. Unfair wages, longer working hours, and worse conditions were all things which affected women in the workforce. And without the right to vote, they just had to put up and shut up. So when the suffragette movement came around, the long hard fight began for not only women to get the vote, but for working class men as well. People wanted more from life than to just work and ultimately run the risk of dying in a factory, so factions of the public, particularly in industrial towns like Manchester and Sheffield, began to band together to fight for better working conditions they could have a say in. In 1883, the Metropolitan Police decided that they needed the assistance of women, and so they created a new job role, police matron. The clue was in the title that this would be a primary care role and not involve anything other than looking after people at the station, much like a matron would oversee a hospital ward. This pastoral role would primarily look after women and children that had been caught in the crossfire of crimes, but also look after any female criminals which had been arrested. It took 6 years before more women were recruited into the same role, and by 1889, 14 women worked as police matrons across the different police districts in London. The role was usually a byproduct of being married to a policeman, but it was not easy from the get-go. Unlike the policemen who had a protective uniform, the matrons were in dresses with no protective equipment at all, which left them vulnerable to attack when working. Now, over the next 20 years, the fight for the vote ramped up, and the suffragettes won a partial vote for women over 30 who owned property in 1918. But before this, the police had a problem. World War I started in 1914, and many men were sent off to fight, including many police officers who were drafted into military service. Before this, the attitudes to women being in the police force had been much like they were for women having the vote, entirely disregarded by the men in charge. With no other option than to have the streets looked after, the women that had been standing on the picket line and who would still go on to brawl with the police were allowed to join them. Of course, keeping them on the back foot from the get-go, these brave and valiant women were not given the titles their male counterparts had. They were not officers. They were a voluntary unit, because God forbid a woman get paid for the same job a man does. But this was often the case, as women had to prove themselves for free before they were deemed worthy of payment, and their uniform, once again, was not fit for purpose. The founders of the WPV, the Women's Police Volunteers, were Margaret Damer Dawson, Nina Boyle and Mary Allen. These three women were all suffragettes, but during the time of the war, the suffragists called a truce as fighting the war effort was more important, as after all, if they had no country, there was nothing to fight for. But this didn't allow the protesting to end. The infiltration of the very systems that had dominated them was a way to tackle their oppression from the inside out. With positive actions would come change. Nina Boyle was a journalist and novelist who wrote adventure books which featured strong female characters. As part of her journalism and political campaigning, she knew what it was like to be a female prisoner. As a result, Nina campaigned for the protection of female prisoners. In 1912, she became the head of the Women's Freedom League's Department for Politics, but Nina preferred to carry out antisocial behaviour and create civil disturbances. Unlike some other groups who felt that their militantism had to be violent, the WFL was a breakaway group from the Pankhurst Women's Social and Political Union, the WSPU, Nina just liked to cause a nuisance. She would chain herself to government buildings, write votes for women on any official paperwork she ever had to fill out, including the census, and gather women together to just make noise outside government buildings on a regular basis. Nina wrote about the injustices of women who were physically and sexually abused, and she noted that the sentences handed out to men were laughable and were similar to minor theft, even though the emotional damage was far greater to a victim than a loss of property could ever elicit. In prison, Nina witnessed the mistreatment of her fellow female inmates. All kinds of life-changing abuse was afflicted upon them, and male prison officers were allowed to basically do whatever they wanted to these women who were locked in the cells. As a result of this abuse of power, Nina began campaigning for equal employment opportunities within the police, and for there to be exclusively female-run prisons. In 1914, she saw the opportunity the war afforded her, and so she decided to tackle the problem from inside the belly of the beast. But of course, the male-dominated police force wouldn't just let women join them. So along with Margaret Damer Dawson, an anti-vivisectionist, philanthropist, and proud lesbian, the pair devised a plan to create the WPV. women's police volunteers. Margaret and Nina were both very strong characters, and so they only managed to tolerate each other for about a year before the WPV was disbanded in favour of Margaret's new venture, the Women's Police Service. Now, even in the early stages, this group was up against it. The police commissioner despised Margaret, mainly because of homophobia, and also a dislike of strong women. He fought against the WPS the whole time, and made things very difficult for them, hoping that after the war, the police could go back to the boys' club it once had been. And these men did try their best, but the government pushed forward to make the most of using women in services they'd now found themselves understaffed in. As many men died in World War I, there had to be a way to backfill some of the spaces they'd left behind. The WPS lost the name police in their title and became the Women's Auxiliary Service instead. They campaigned hard to become equal to male officers. Mary Allen, who was Margaret's girlfriend and a women's rights campaigner as well, was also able to be there for her partner and assisted her as she climbed the incredibly difficult ladder within a group that didn't want her to even have access to the ladder in the first place, let alone get her foot on the first rung. But in 1920, something happened which would halt their progress. Margaret had a huge heart attack and died suddenly at just 46 years old. But Mary didn't want to see her partner's hard work go to waste, so she picked up where Margaret left off. Now, luckily for Mary, Margaret left behind an inheritance for her, but this mainly consisted of property, as she'd sunk most of her funds into her work to integrate women into the police force. And some of this money could be seen in how quickly these women were already exceeding their male counterparts in the ways of doing things. Alongside duties dished out by the male force, which included assisting with displaced women and children from the war, they were also put in charge of patrolling the munitions factories to make sure they were not being interfered with by any potential enemies. These locations were often spread out as it was not a good idea to have two explosive factories next to each other for obvious reasons, and so this was a long way to walk between them. And so it was more than likely dished out as busy work to keep the women walking from place to place. But they had other ideas. They invested in buying a fleet of motorbikes and sidecars so they could travel in pairs, and this instantly put them above the male police force, who had no modes of transport apart from the occasional officer on horseback. Understandably, the vision of female officers whizzing about on motorbikes put many noses out of joint. And by the following year, the boys had thrown their toys out of the pram and now had them as well. It's not nice to feel left out, is it? So with a little taste of their own medicine, and with women now being allowed to be in Parliament, things were rapidly changing. But that didn't mean that the misogynistic attitudes were disappearing. Far from it. If anything, they were getting worse. But with that unsurprising turn of events, it's probably time to take a break from rolling my eyes and to have a delicious coffee break. Now, as you may know, I recently went abroad to go and get married, and a wonderful time I had, but I did make one grave error. I didn't take my London Nootropics coffee with me. I wasn't really sure what the rules were about moving mushrooms around to America, so I left my beloved daily drink behind, and boy, did I miss it. I drink London Nootropics every single day when I'm at home. I literally have a cup next to me right now, and I start my day with a cup of Mush Love, which is the cup that I've got right now, which kicks things off with a beautiful blend of mushroom goodness, which gives you everything you need to start your day on a balanced note. With chaga and cordyceps in their blend, it's perfect for boosting your immune system during cold season, but also keeping your brain firing on all cylinders. It's made in conjunction with Fantastic Fungi, the people that made that amazing Netflix doc all about the power of mushrooms, and I find it just sets me up beautifully for a fully productive day. Now, depending on what my week is looking like, I find myself dipping into all their instant coffee blends, and I always have some in my handbag. Flow is great for when I have a deadline, Mojo is great for getting me to the gym when I really can't be bothered, and Zen is great for an afternoon pick-me-up or to chill out after a particularly stressful work meeting. We all know those ones that could have been an email. I've been drinking London Nootropics since 2020, and I have never wavered. I asked them to sponsor me, and I also have everyone I know hooked on it too, because over time, the benefits really do stack up. Now, I have a beautiful discount for you. Use the code Macabre at the checkout to get your exclusive 20% off your order. And if you purchase a monthly subscription, which is what I have as it takes the stress out of remembering to order it, then you get even more of a discount on top. So if you want to join me and all my friends in getting yourself some mushroom goodness in your life and to get your body and brain firing on all cylinders, then why not give it a go by heading to londonnootropics.com and using my offer code Macabre, that's MACABRE, at checkout to get a lovely discount. The new year is coming and I know we can all do with a kickstart to get us through Christmas, so start now to get the most out of it. You're gonna love it, and I love that for you. Now, if you've yet to plan your Christmas party or family get-together for the festive season, then I've got a deal for you, which is something far more fun than a dry function room pub turkey dinner. Instead, why not go and experience a Martian invasion and see who survives? It's definitely going to make you some Christmas memories for years to come. You can experience H.G. Wells' classic tale like never before in Jeff Wayne's The War of the Worlds, The Immersive Experience. This groundbreaking production merges Jeff Wayne's legendary musical works with cutting-edge technology, live actors, virtual reality, 3D sound and projection mapping, creating an unforgettable immersive spectacle. And just in case you're not quite sure what it would be like to experience a Martian invasion, let me paint a picture for you. You'll slide down a Martian handling machine claw, fly to Mars in a hot air balloon, have a drink in the Redweed Bar mid-apocalypse to steady your nerves, and you'll come face to face with 300-foot tall fighting machines, all while Jeff Wayne's iconic music plays around you. It's not just me who's obsessed with this experience either. The reviews speak for themselves. This is the world's #1 rated immersive experience on TripAdvisor, and it's won 12 major awards with over 18,000 5-star reviews. That's not to be sniffed at. And because I'm such a fan, and I know you'll love it too, I've got you a discount so you can go and enjoy the fun. Use the code Macabre10, that's MACABRE10 at checkout for £10 off 2 or more tickets. It's valid on all ticket types for any time slot up until the 31st of December 2025. But don't wait around, the offer runs out on the 30th of November 2025, so you'll want to get it booked ASAP. Book now at thewaroftheworldsimmersive.com with my exclusive discount and prepare for one of the best nights out in London and perhaps of your life. Trust me, once is not enough, you will be hooked, and I wouldn't blame you if you wanted to go back several times over, because I have. And you never know, I might see you there. Alright, let's head back into the story. Now, by the end of the war, just a couple of policewomen had been appointed, but kind of not really officially. Whilst some had the power of arrest, one in Grantham in the East Midlands and one in Thames Valley Police, it was not the overarching equality that was being sought after, and there were still many conditions against them. By 1919, the Sex Disqualification Act was passed, which meant women could no longer legally be disallowed entry into certain professions. This now included the police force and legal professions. But this didn't mean the road instantly opened up for women. During 1919 and 1920, women police officers were slowly recruited, starting with 25 officers in the Met. This was then rolled out across the country, and by 1921, 238 women were employed as officers within their respective police forces. However, some areas lagged behind. They didn't recruit women at all, the police breaking the law, why am I not surprised? And it took a long time until the numbers, training and positions within the force were rivaling the men. The first female officers weren't allowed to patrol on their own, their helmets and uniform were not as protective as their male counterparts, and in some situations, heeled boots were provided, which would have made it uncomfortable for them to be on their feet all day. Women were still put in charge of mainly female criminals, or put in charge of delivering pastoral care, or put in charge of looking after children. But over time, it seemed their integration into the force was being rejected by the majority of authorities across the country, or that women were simply leaving due to feeling eternally excluded. By 1922, the Met Police had cut their numbers of female officers to just 20 individuals, and the Chief of Police said he wanted to get rid of them altogether, as they were said to be more of a resource due to needing to be supervised whilst on duty. This was a purposeful attempt to eliminate women from the job, but again, what we have to remember is that it was illegal, not that the force seemed to care. It seemed the police force weren't alone in their thoughts, and the Home Secretary, Edward Short, decided during 1922 that he would try and get rid of the women's police faction altogether. He said the female police officers weren't adding anything to catching criminals, and that their role was more akin to school teachers or pastors in that they were more of a preventative role, which gives you an idea of the mob the police force had become since its inception. It was obviously all about catching criminals to have a ruck and not working to stop the crimes from being carried out in the first place. So with this governmental backing, the police force tried their best to oust the women from the force, but nevertheless they persisted. And with the backing of Nancy Astor, the first female Member of Parliament, a teeny number were kept on. Just 24 women remained in the Met, but this bare minimum allowed women to keep their foot in the door in the force, and despite as hard as they tried to get rid of them, the women kept showing up for work. By 1924, that number had increased across the country from the almost total ban to 110 women working in various stations. Now, during the early years of integrating women into the police force, one particular woman refused to let her male counterparts win. Lillian Wiles joined the Met in 1919 and became one of the first police sergeants in the Women's Division in the Met. By 1922, and with the support of the head of the Criminal Investigations Department, the CID, Lillian had convinced the Met that in cases of abuse and assault against women, that female officers were better suited to take statements. Before this, they'd had to have a male assistant with them, and when dealing with someone that has suffered male violence against them, the victim would usually withhold vital information, as it wasn't something they wanted to say in front of a man. Despite the support of the head of the CID, Lillian still suffered with her colleagues being disparaging and difficult, and they didn't see the value in her work. The public were also the same, and she said she was often a spectacle on the streets, with people being verbally abusive and saying she was unwomanly for choosing such a profession. But slow progress was made, and eventually Lillian became the first chief inspector in the Met, and stayed with them for 30 years, retiring in 1949. Perhaps as a testament to how much harder she had to work than the men in the force, she only ever took one sick day in the whole time she was employed by the Met. After her retirement, she wrote a memoir of her remarkable time with the police, called A Woman at Scotland Yard, Reflections on the Struggles and Achievements of 30 Years in the Metropolitan Police. Lillian was instrumental in bringing in the power of arrest for female officers, and other improvements saw part of their duties being compulsory patrols, so now women were out on the street and could tackle criminals. But their training was less than men's, their uniform, unlike the men's, didn't have a helmet until much later on, and no truncheon was provided, and even when it was years down the line, it was much shorter than the men's, and I'm not going to make that comment, but we all know why. This was a deliberate way to make women more vulnerable on the street, and again, a tactic to make them back down from the job. In between the two world wars, it seemed it was a constant battle to keep women in their roles within the force, but when World War II was looming, it was obvious women were going to step up to the plate yet again to backfill the spaces the men left behind. Now, World War I killed 6% of the male population in Britain, and 1% in World War II, with an increased amount of civilian casualties due to the bombing raids, mainly on London. So, the Women's Auxiliary Corps was founded during World War II, which was a sneaky way to trap women into a new group which could then be disbanded once the war was over. But as time drew on, and attitudes to women in the workforce was changing, and with World War II again cementing their usefulness across the board, people higher up started to actually take notice. Things didn't change overnight, but towards the end of the war, the number of female police officers rocketed up from in the double digits to over 1,000. After the war, it seemed that female officers weren't going anywhere, but even over the next 2 decades, their place within the force was segregated, with many having separate working areas, beats, and even rest spaces in their stations. In the late 60s, the first ever black female officer was appointed in Croydon. Faye Allen was previously a nurse and saw an advert in the paper recruiting officers, so she applied. She was taken on, but as soon as the press got wind of her joining the force, she faced a complete paparazzi barrage wherever she went. Faye said all she wanted to do was change her career and didn't think she was making history, but she was happy to do so. But of course, her appointment was met with racist letters and phone calls to the police, and she was tempted to leave. But after a few years and a few station changes, people eventually shut the hell up and let her go on with her job. As women's liberation marches were being held across the country in the 1970s, and women were fighting and campaigning for equal pay, the backlash again rose its head as to why women should be paid the same for doing exactly the same job and then have to go home and look after their families. That doesn't apparently seem fair to men. But the more women, and a few supportive MPs, complained, the tides began to change. Many important acts were passed during the 1970s. The Occupational Segregation Act, which stopped women being actively excluded from certain areas and tasks within the workplace. The Equal Pay Act, which was meant to see women be paid the same for equal work and job titles, even though we know this is often not the case nowadays. The Employment Protection Act, which stopped women being booted from the force if they decided to get pregnant and have a family, protecting their jobs for when they returned, and giving them maternity pay for when they were away. Again, we know employers still find creative ways around these things, but it is illegal. And there was also the Sexual Discrimination Act, which would make it illegal to discriminate against anyone because of their gender in the workplace. Well, at least that's what the aim was. Now, all of these acts saw that the separate divisions of the police had to be slowly abolished, and the men and women had to integrate, even though often they didn't want to. And this came from both sides. Suddenly going from a women's only office to a shared one was difficult, and often the women were seen as cleaners and tea makers for the men, and often to make their lives easier, they just had to get on and do it. After all, the rules of the patriarchy don't just stop when it's been ingrained in people since birth. But over time, and with more responsibility, women rose up the ranks. They started to take charge, get more senior positions, but it was often a daily struggle, and the women had to work longer, unpaid hours to be respected by the men who did far less. But it wasn't all men within the force. Some appreciated their female colleagues, some found that actually the boys' club was oppressive and equally didn't allow for men who didn't want to be part of the rowdy crowd to exist within a more harmonious environment. And ultimately, this began to weed out some of the more difficult old-school male officers. Within London, a female officer, Alison Halford, became the head of Tottenham Court Road Police Station, and she assisted in helping set up women's only spaces for abuse victims. And by 1983, she was the Assistant Chief of Merseyside Police, making her the highest-ranking policewoman in the country at that time. The improvements were again incremental and hard-won, but the 1990s did see an attitude shift across the country in terms of people's rights. The Gay Police Association was formed in 1990 for LGBTQ+ officers, and it's believed that there were around 16,000 members across the country that joined in the first year, which was about 13% of the total force overall. Now, over the early 2000s, there were still many problems highlighted within the police force. Many ex-policewomen released information in memoirs and articles which spoke of just how difficult it was for them to advance against their male colleagues, one of which being Alison Halford. Many spoke about how racism was rife and groups were set up within the force to try and counteract this. Trans women unsurprisingly struggled within the force, and transitioning whilst an officer was incredibly difficult. Now, whilst we don't know who was officially the first trans officer within the force, it was Special Constable Stephanie Robinson who founded the National Trans Police Association around 2008 to assist her trans colleagues and retired associates with emotional support. It was only in 2017 that the Metropolitan Police had its first female and openly gay police commissioner, Cressida Dick. Cressida served in the police since 1983 and retired in 2002, but her resignation was definitely fueled by a lot of revelations within the police force. When a Metropolitan Police officer, Wayne Couzens, abducted, abused and murdered a woman during lockdown whilst in uniform, it prompted a major review of the actions within his force to deal with his previous behaviours. Many of Couzens' colleagues knew what he was like, and he'd even been allowed to return to work after an abuse allegation had been made against him just a few days before he murdered Sarah Everard. The allegations made against Wayne Couzens were of indecent exposure made at a McDonald's drive-thru near his home in Kent, and the attending officer after the incident was reported. The CCTV was checked by the officer, and when she realised the car was registered to Couzens, the investigations were halted, according to the Independent Office of Police Conduct report, the IOPC, which was carried out around the investigation into Sarah Everard's death, which, as you may remember, took weeks to solve. As the IOPC discovered, there had been many attempts to cover up not only this case, but it revealed a lot of other sexist, racist and homophobic actions that were still rife within the force. When a vigil for Sarah Everard was handled aggressively by male officers who were sitting silently near the place she was abducted by one of their colleagues, it further highlighted male violence against women and really proved a point that not just one officer was untrustworthy. It seemed the vast majority were all cut from the same cloth. The arrests were made due to the fact that the vigil broke the law over numbers of people gathering together, but instead of just handing out fines, this turned into a violent scuffle in which the police hugely overreacted. It seemed they'd entirely lost control. This caused Police Commissioner Cressida to resign just a few months later, and many think that she shouldered the blame for a lot of her colleagues' misgivings. But equally, you can't rise through the ranks without being somewhat meshed within the organisation, and in order to succeed, many female police officers just had to turn a blind eye to their male colleagues' actions on a regular basis. So it's still very much a man's world within the police force, and when you consider it took over 130 years to get a woman in charge, there's still probably sadly another few decades left yet before things are on an equal playing field. But the tenacity, hard work, and sheer stick-at-it attitude these women had from day one to enter a male-dominated field, be better at it in many cases than the men, accept worse pay, often work for longer hours for free, be less protected, and have to put up with being intimidated, threatened and bullied on a daily basis, well, never tell me that a woman is weak, because they sure as hell are 5 times the man any of these male officers could ever be. Thanks for joining me for this episode of Macabre London. Let me know what your thoughts were about that episode on Spotify or my social media, and don't forget to leave me a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening to this on, or a thumbs up on YouTube. If you don't have any thoughts or theories but you've made it this far and you just want to let me know that you're a true part of the Ghoul Gang, then please leave me the lady police officer emoji in the comments on YouTube or Spotify. I know it's not the London uniform, but it'll do, or also you can leave me whatever emoji you like. Coming up next time, it will be the last episode of the Crime and Punishment series, and we'll be exploring some cases which changed everything in the realm of forensics. So make sure you join me next time to keep up. And also, there'll be some exciting news about my Christmas series this year. And if you want to join me for the post-episode discussion, make sure you head to Patreon for Pod Mortem, the news show after the show, where I delve into more of my research and my theories around what's happened. And I'll also give you a little update on my wedding and honeymoon as well. So if you want to catch up with me, let's have a natter in the comments over on Patreon. And don't forget, if you join the Patreon, you also get early and ad-free episodes by heading to patreon.com/Macabre London. I'll see you there. Big thanks to my amazing top-tier Patreon producers, Christina, Christoph, Mary, Matilda, Ravel, Sally, Sam, Sarah, Terry and Veronica, and all of our other fantastic patrons. If you want to get your name read out in the episodes or listed in the show notes, join us on Patreon. I'd love to personally welcome you to the Ghoul Gang and have a natter about the latest episodes. And if you're struggling to know what to ask for Christmas, then a gift subscription to Patreon, yes, you can buy just 1 month up to a whole year, is super easy for whoever is buying for you, and it will be exactly what you want. So don't forget to put it on your Christmas list. Don't Don't forget to check out both our sponsors today, thewaroftheworldsimmersive.com, and use my code Macabre10 to get your special discount code of £10 off 2 or more tickets before November the 30th. You can book for dates after that date, but the discount itself stops working on the 30th, so make sure you book before then. And make sure you give London Nootropics a try, or stock up yourself before we really get into Christmas good and proper, because I know we can all do with all the help we can get this time of year just to make it through. So head to londonnootropics.com and use the code Macabre to get 20% off any order or subscription. And all the links are in the show notes to make it super easy for you. Thanks for joining me for another Macabre tale from the city's past. I've been Nikki Druce. Remember to stay spooky, and I'll see you ghouls next time.